I thought I was going to my sister's wedding to celebrate her happiness, but instead I ended up destroying it completely, and honestly, she deserved every single moment of it. Let me start from the beginning, because this story has layers that go deeper than you might expect. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. My sister Emma is 31, and she's always been the golden child of our family. You know the type, the one who could do no wrong, who always got the better Christmas presents, who never had to follow the same rules as everyone else. Emma had just gotten engaged to David, this successful investment banker who drove a Tesla and owned a condo in downtown Chicago. The wedding was planned for 6 months, and let me tell you, it was going to be the event of the year. 200 guests, a venue that cost more than most people's annual salary, and a dress that probably cost more than my car. But here's what nobody in my family knew. I had just gotten promoted to senior software engineer at a Fortune 500 company. My salary had nearly doubled, and I was finally making more money than Emma ever had. I'd been working 70-hour weeks for 3 years straight, teaching myself coding on weekends, and grinding through every certification I could get my hands on. But did anyone in my family care? Did anyone even ask about my career? Of course not. The wedding planning process was, let's just say it was an experience. Emma had assigned me the role of bridesmaid, which basically meant I was her unpaid assistant for 6 months. Pick up the flowers, confirm the catering, call the venue, chase down RSVPs. You name it, I did it. And every single time I completed a task, Emma would find something wrong with it. The flowers weren't the right shade of blush pink. The catering timeline was off by 15 minutes. The venue coordinator wasn't responsive enough. Nothing was ever good enough, and somehow everything that went wrong was my fault. But you know what? I kept my mouth shut and kept helping, because that's what good sisters do, right? 3 weeks before the wedding, Emma called me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was exhausted from a 14-hour day debugging code, but I answered because I'm an idiot who never learned to set boundaries. Sarah, we have a problem, she said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of anxiety that meant I was about to inherit another one of her crises. What's wrong now? I asked, already knowing I didn't want to hear the answer. David's best man just dropped out. His brother got into some kind of accident and he has to fly to Denver. We need someone to step in and give a speech, and David doesn't have anyone else close enough to do it. I sat there in silence for a moment, because I knew exactly where this was going. Emma, please don't tell me. I need you to write a speech about David. Something heartfelt about how perfect he is for me, how happy I am, all that stuff. You're good with words, and you know David well enough. The thing is, I didn't know David well at all. Sure, I'd spent time with him at family dinners and holidays, but we'd never had a real conversation. He was polite enough, but there was always something off about him. He had this way of looking at you like he was calculating your net worth, and his jokes always seemed to come at someone else's expense. But I agreed to write the speech, because that's what I always did. I spent hours crafting something that would make Emma happy, full of flowery language about their perfect love story and bright future together. I even included some personal anecdotes that made David sound charming and thoughtful, even though most of them were complete fiction. The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner at this upscale restaurant that probably cost more per plate than I used to make in a week. Emma looked absolutely stunning in her rehearsal dress, and David looked, well, he looked like someone who knew he was about to marry into a family with connections and money. During dinner, Emma stood up to give a toast. She thanked everyone for being there, gushed about how perfect everything was going to be, and then, she got to the part about family. I want to especially thank my sister Sarah, she said, raising her glass toward me. She's been such a huge help with all the wedding planning. I honestly don't know what I would have done without my little helper. Little helper. That's what she called me. In front of 200 people. Not her sister, not her maid of honor, not even her friend. Her little helper. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, but I forced a smile and raised my glass. Everyone else laughed like it was the most charming thing they'd ever heard, because Emma could make anything sound endearing when she wanted to. After dinner, I was walking back to my hotel room when I heard voices coming from the hotel bar. I recognized David's laugh immediately. It was this loud, obnoxious sound that always made me cringe. I was about to walk past when I heard my name mentioned. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped closer to the bar entrance where I could hear better. David was sitting with 3 of his groomsmen, and they were all pretty clearly intoxicated. "Honestly, Emma's family is a trip," David was saying. "Her sister is like this sad little servant who does whatever Emma tells her to do. It's actually kind of pathetic." One of his friends laughed. "What does she do for work?" "I have no idea," David replied. "Something with computers, I think. Emma says she's basically a glorified secretary. Lives in this tiny apartment, drives some beat-up Honda. I mean, she's nice enough, but she's definitely not going anywhere in life." The other guys chuckled, and one of them said something about how different siblings could be. But David wasn't done. "The best part is, Emma has her convinced that she's being helpful, but honestly, we could have hired a wedding planner and gotten better results. Sarah's been running around like a chicken with its head cut off for months, and Emma just keeps giving her more tasks to make her feel important." I stood there in the hallway, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. These people, my sister's future husband and his friends, they were laughing at me. They thought I was some kind of pathetic loser who lived to serve Emma. But you know what? They had no idea who they were messing with. I went back to my room and opened my laptop. I pulled up the speech I'd written for David, and I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted the entire thing and started over. The wedding day was absolutely perfect. The weather was gorgeous, the venue looked like something out of a magazine, and Emma looked like a princess in her custom dress. I played my role perfectly, smiling, helping with last-minute details, making sure everyone had what they needed. During the ceremony, I watched David and Emma exchange vows, and I felt nothing. No happiness, no excitement, no joy for my sister. Just this cold, calculating feeling that I'd never experienced before. The reception was in full swing when they called me up to give the best man speech. I walked to the microphone, looked out at all those faces, and took a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah, Emma's sister. I've been asked to say a few words about David and their beautiful relationship." I paused, smiled, and continued. "I've had the unique privilege of watching David and Emma's relationship develop over the past 3 years. And I have to say, David has been absolutely consistent in who he is." A few people chuckled, thinking I was building up to something sweet. David is the kind of man who always speaks his mind. Just last night, in fact, he was telling his groomsmen about how he really sees our family. He described me as Emma's sad little servant and said I was pathetic for being so helpful with the wedding planning. The room went completely silent. Emma's face went white, and David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He also mentioned that he has no idea what I do for work, and that Emma told him I'm basically a glorified secretary who lives in a tiny apartment and drives a beat-up Honda. I could see people starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Emma was staring at me with pure horror, and David was frantically shaking his head. "The thing is, David, I think there are some things you should know about your new wife's little helper. I'm actually a senior software engineer at Microsoft. I make $180,000 a year, which is about $60,000 more than you make at your investment firm." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. "That beat-up Honda? I paid cash for it 3 years ago because I don't believe in car payments." "That tiny apartment? It's actually a 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park that I own outright. No mortgage." I could see David's face turning red, and Emma looked like she might pass out. But here's the really interesting part. "Emma, remember when you told David that I was basically a secretary? Remember when you've been introducing me as your little helper for the past 6 months?" I turned to face my sister directly. "I've been keeping quiet about my promotion because I wanted to surprise the family. But since David seems to think I'm going nowhere in life, I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share that I've also been offered a position in Microsoft's London office. I'll be managing a team of 12 engineers and making the equivalent of about $250,000 a year. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Emma was crying now, and David looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. So David, when you were laughing with your friends about how pathetic I am, you were actually talking about someone who makes more money than you, owns more property than you, and has more career prospects than you'll probably ever have. I paused, looking around the room at all the shocked faces. But you know what the really sad part is? I spent months planning this wedding. I wrote your vows, Emma, because you said you were too busy. I coordinated with all your vendors because you said you trusted me to handle it. I even wrote this speech because you said David's best man dropping out was a crisis only I could solve. I could see several people in the audience starting to look at Emma and David with very different expressions. I did all of this because I thought I was helping my sister have the perfect wedding. But what I was actually doing was enabling two people who have no respect for me, no interest in my life, and no appreciation for anything I've done for them. Emma stood up from her chair, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, please. Please what, Emma? Please continue pretending that you see me as an equal? Please keep letting you treat me like your personal assistant? Please keep smiling while your husband makes fun of me behind my back. I turned back to the microphone and addressed the room. I want everyone here to know that Emma and David deserve each other. They're both people who think they're better than everyone else, who use people when it's convenient, and who have no problem talking behind the backs of people who care about them. The room was in complete chaos now. People were whispering, pointing, and several guests were starting to get up and leave. Emma was sobbing, David was arguing with his groomsmen, and our parents looked absolutely mortified. So here's my wedding gift to you both, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm going to London. I'm starting my new job in 6 weeks, and I'm going to build an amazing life for myself surrounded by people who actually value what I bring to the table. I set the microphone down and started walking toward the exit. As I passed Emma and David's table, I stopped and leaned down to speak directly to my sister. By the way, Emma, you still owe me $3,000 for all the wedding expenses I covered when you were short on cash last month. Since you're so concerned about my financial situation, I'll be expecting payment within 30 days. I walked out of that reception hall with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests and a completely destroyed wedding celebration. The aftermath was intense. My phone started ringing before I even made it back to my hotel room. Emma, my parents, various relatives, and even some of the wedding guests were calling and texting nonstop. Some people were angry with me for ruining the wedding, others were proud of me for standing up for myself, and a few were just calling to get more details about what had happened. Emma left me 17 voicemails that night, ranging from angry to devastated to pleading. David sent me a series of texts that were, well, let's just say they weren't very nice. My parents called me at 2 in the morning demanding that I come back and apologize to everyone. But you know what? I turned off my phone and slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, I checked out of my hotel and drove straight home. I had a lot to think about, and a lot of planning to do for my move to London. But first, I needed to process what had happened and figure out how I felt about it. Did I feel bad about ruining Emma's wedding? Honestly, no. I felt relieved. I felt free. I felt like I had finally stood up for myself after years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. Over the next few weeks, the full story started to come out. Apparently, several of the wedding guests had been uncomfortable with how Emma and David treated people, but nobody had ever said anything. My speech had given them permission to acknowledge what they'd been seeing all along. 3 of Emma's bridesmaids called me to apologize for not standing up for me sooner. 2 of David's groomsmen reached out to say they'd been disgusted by his behavior at the rehearsal dinner. Even some of my relatives admitted they'd noticed how dismissive Emma had been toward me but hadn't known how to address it. The most interesting call came from Emma's maid of honor, Jessica. We'd never been particularly close, but she called me about 2 weeks after the wedding to tell me something that made everything make even more sense. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that I probably should have told you months ago," she said. "Emma has been talking about you behind your back for years. She's always complaining about how you're clingy and needy, and how you're jealous of her success." I wasn't surprised, but it still stung to hear it confirmed. "But here's the thing," Jessica continued. "She's also been lying about your job. She's been telling people that you work in tech support, answering phones and helping people with computer problems. She's been saying that you barely make enough money to pay rent and that you're always asking the family for help." That explained a lot. Emma had been actively sabotaging my reputation to make herself look better by comparison. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "Because I thought you knew," Jessica said. "I thought you were just choosing to ignore it to keep the peace. But after what happened at the wedding, I realized you had no idea how she'd been portraying you to everyone." The conversation with Jessica was a turning point for me. I realized that Emma's behavior wasn't just about the wedding, or even about David. She had been systematically undermining me for years, creating a narrative where she was the successful, responsible older sister and I was the struggling, dependent younger sister. That narrative had become so entrenched that even I had started to believe parts of it. Even though I knew I was successful in my career, I had somehow internalized the idea that I was less important than Emma, that my achievements didn't matter as much as hers. But standing up at that wedding, telling the truth about my life and my accomplishments, had broken the spell. I wasn't Emma's little helper anymore. I was Sarah, a successful software engineer who was about to start an incredible new chapter of her life in London. The move to London was everything I had hoped it would be. My new job was challenging and rewarding, my team was brilliant and supportive, and I was finally living in a place where nobody knew me as Emma's sister. I was just Sarah, and that was enough. I rented a beautiful flat in Shoreditch, started taking weekend trips to Paris and Amsterdam, and even began dating someone I met through work. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living my own life instead of playing a supporting role in someone else's story. Emma tried to maintain contact for the first few months. She would send me long emails about how hurt she was, how I had embarrassed her in front of everyone she cared about, and how I needed to apologize and make things right. But she never once acknowledged her own behavior or took responsibility for how she had treated me. David, on the other hand, went completely silent after that first night of angry texts. I heard through the family grapevine that he was having a difficult time at work, and that several of his colleagues had been at the wedding and witnessed my speech. Apparently, word had gotten around his office that he was the kind of person who talked behind people's backs and looked down on others. My parents eventually came around, though it took some time. They were initially furious with me for causing such a scene, but after several long conversations about the dynamics in our family, they started to understand why I had reached my breaking point. "We didn't realize how dismissive Emma had been toward you," my mother said during one of our video calls. "We thought she was just being Emma. You know how she is." "That's exactly the problem, Mom," I replied. "Everyone just accepts that Emma is Emma, and that means she gets to treat people however she wants without consequences." It was a difficult conversation, but it was necessary. My parents had spent so many years managing Emma's moods and catering to her needs that they had forgotten to pay attention to how their other daughter was being affected. The most surprising development came about 6 months after the wedding. I received a LinkedIn message from someone named Marcus, who introduced himself as a friend of David's from college. "I wasn't at the wedding, but I heard about what happened from several people who were there," he wrote. "I wanted to reach out because I think you should know that David has a history of this kind of behavior. He's always been someone who looks down on people he thinks are beneath him, and he's particularly nasty about women in tech." Marcus went on to explain that David had been fired from his previous job for creating a hostile work environment, and that several of his female colleagues had filed complaints about his behavior. Emma either didn't know about this or had chosen to ignore it. "I probably should have said something when I heard he was getting married," Marcus continued. "But I didn't know your sister and I thought it wasn't my place." After hearing about your speech, though, I realized that you're exactly the kind of person who deserves to know the truth about who she was dealing with. This information gave me a new perspective on the entire situation. David wasn't just someone who had made some thoughtless comments at a bachelor party. He was someone with a pattern of disrespecting and undermining women, particularly women who were successful in their careers. Emma had unknowingly married someone who saw her sister's success as a threat to his own ego, and who had been actively working to diminish my reputation to make himself feel better. I forwarded Marcus's message to Emma, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I thought she deserved to know who she had married. I didn't hear back from her for several weeks, but when she finally responded, her message was surprisingly different from her previous communications. "Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since I got your message about David," she wrote. "I've started to notice some things about his behavior that I was ignoring before. He does talk down to people, especially women, and he's been making comments about your success that I now realize were completely inappropriate." She went on to explain that she had started couples therapy with David, and that she was beginning to understand how toxic some of the dynamics in their relationship had become. "I also want to apologize for how I treated you during the wedding planning, and honestly, for how I've treated you for years. I've been so focused on maintaining this image of being the perfect older sister that I lost sight of who you actually are and what you've accomplished." It was the first real apology I had ever received from Emma, and it meant more to me than I expected it to. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away," she continued. "I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back your trust. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, even though it was painful for me to hear." We started having occasional video calls after that, and slowly began rebuilding our relationship. It was different from before, more honest, more equal, and definitely more respectful. Emma started asking about my work, my life in London, and my plans for the future. She stopped treating me like her assistant and started treating me like her sister. David, meanwhile, did not take well to the therapy process. According to Emma, he was resistant to examining his own behavior and kept insisting that I was the problem, not him. Their marriage lasted about 18 months before Emma filed for divorce. "I realized that I married someone who didn't respect me any more than he respected you," she told me during one of our calls. "He just did it better because he needed me to look good in front of other people." The divorce was messy and expensive, but Emma came out of it with a much clearer understanding of what she wanted in a partner and in life. She started her own consulting business, moved to a smaller apartment that she actually preferred, and began dating someone who treated her as an equal rather than as a trophy. As for me, I've been in London for almost 2 years now, and I can honestly say that destroying Emma's wedding was one of the best things I've ever done for myself. Not because I enjoyed hurting her, but because it forced me to stop accepting treatment that I didn't deserve. I've been promoted twice since arriving in London. I'm now managing a team of 20 engineers, and I'm in a relationship with someone who thinks my success is attractive rather than threatening. I've traveled to 12 different countries, bought a flat in Zone 2, and started a small investment portfolio that's doing quite well. More importantly, I've learned to set boundaries with people, to speak up when I'm being treated poorly, and to never again accept being someone's little helper when I'm capable of being so much more. The wedding speech went viral, by the way. Someone recorded it on their phone and posted it on social media, and it ended up being shared hundreds of thousands of times. I received messages from people all over the world who said my story had inspired them to stand up for themselves in their own families and relationships. One message that particularly stuck with me came from a young woman named Ashley, who wrote, "I watched your speech and realized that I've been letting my older brother treat me the same way Emma was treating you. I just got a promotion at work and I haven't told my family because I know he'll find a way to make it about him. But after seeing your video, I decided to speak up. Thank you for showing me that I deserve better." That's when I realized that my decision to speak up at the wedding had been about more than just my relationship with Emma. It had been about refusing to accept a narrative that diminished my worth and my accomplishments. There's something powerful about seeing your own story reflected in someone else's experience. When I watched that video of my speech, I saw a woman who had finally decided she was worth fighting for. I saw someone who had chosen truth over comfort, self-respect over family harmony, and personal growth over maintaining the status quo. Looking back, I don't regret a single word I said that night. Yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it caused pain and embarrassment for people I cared about. But it also freed me from a dynamic that was slowly killing my sense of self-worth. Emma and I have a better relationship now than we've ever had, precisely because I was willing to blow up the old one. We talk as equals now, we support each other's successes, and we've both learned to be more honest about our feelings and our needs. My parents have also changed how they interact with both of us. They've stopped expecting me to be the accommodating one who keeps the peace at all costs, and they've started holding Emma accountable for her behavior in ways they never did before. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. Emma needed to hear that she was treating people poorly, even if it was painful for her to confront that truth. David needed to face the consequences of his disrespectful behavior, even if it meant his marriage fell apart. And I needed to learn that my worth wasn't determined by how useful I was to other people. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're someone's little helper or reliable one or peacekeeper, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not just for what you can do for other people. You deserve to have your accomplishments celebrated, not diminished. You deserve to be treated with respect, not taken for granted. And you deserve to be in relationships where people value you for your intelligence, your talents, and your character, not just for your willingness to make their lives easier. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. And sometimes, the people who love you need to see you stand up for yourself before they can learn to treat you better. The wedding speech that destroyed my sister's marriage ultimately saved our relationship. It ended a dynamic that was hurting both of us, and it created space for us to build something better. Sometimes you have to be willing to break something that's not working in order to create something that does. Sometimes you have to be willing to be the bad guy in someone else's story in order to be the hero in your own. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it causes conflict, and even when it changes everything. That's what I learned at Emma's wedding, and that's what I hope you'll remember from my story. You are worth fighting for, even if you have to fight for yourself. Especially if you have to fight for yourself. So what do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you ever been the underestimated one in your family or friend group? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships or gave you the courage to speak up for yourself, please subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one, and I think you'll find them both entertaining and empowering. Until next time, remember that you deserve to be treated with respect, and never let anyone convince you otherwise.